Welcome to Carol and Gary's See America Tour. Hello everyone. Carol, Jasper, and I are now in Kansas City, Kansas. Today is Wednesday, August 15th. Carol and I went to see the Legler Barn Museum in Lenexa today. Lenexa is a suburb of Kansas City. Swiss immigrant Adam Legler purchased land at what is now the corner of 95th and Quibara Road, Lenexa, Kansas in 1863. Adam, with the help of his three sons, built the rock barn in 1864. The barn is 28 feet wide and 39 feet long, and built out of rocks hauled by a team of horses and a wagon from a limestone quarry nearby. One cornerstone measures 18 inches high by 6 feet long. There were 6 small windows on the south side of the barn, used for ventilation of the horses and other animals kept there. In the winter, when it was cold, the small windows were stuffed with hay to protect the animals from the weather. Mr. Legler traded cabbage to local Indians to get the timbers needed for the roof. The barn was built on the nearby path of the Santa Fe Trail, so they often had visitors. Frank and Jesse James often camped on the farm. In the early 1970s, the city wanted to dismantle the barn so that a new savings and loan could be built on the land. With plans to turn the old barn into a museum, the Lenexa Historic Society decided to make sure that the old barn would not be discarded. The structure was torn down in 1972 and the stones stored at a quarry until 1983, when after $100,000 had been raised, reconstruction of the barn began in a city park in Lenexa, approximately 2 miles from where it had been sitting. While at the Legler Barn Museum, Carol and I learned about the importance of spinach as a cash crop for farmers during the 1930s in Lenexa, Kansas. Many of the immigrants to the Lenexa area were from small farms in Belgium. Because eastern Kansas looks so much like Belgium, it was a natural settling place. Spinach is a thick cluster of wide, succulent leaves and grows rapidly in fertile, sandy dirt. Farmers sow the seed in the spring, and the crop is ready in about 3 months. Another crop could be grown in the fall. Spinach is high in fiber and minerals and is an excellent source of vitamin A and C. At one time, an estimated 50 Belgium truck farmers were operating in the vicinity of Lenexa. On Thursday, August 16th, Carol and I drove 45 miles north of Kansas City, Kansas to visit Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Fort Leavenworth was established by Colonel Henry Leavenworth on the Missouri River on May 8, 1827. Fort Leavenworth was the first military settlement in the Kansas Territory and is the oldest active Army post west of the Mississippi River. Sitting on the bluffs overlooking the western bank of the Missouri River, the fort initially served as a military supply depot, arsenal, and troop post, and was dedicated to protecting the fur trade and safeguarding commerce on the Santa Fe Trail. Because Fort Leavenworth is an active military installation, Carol and I both had to show driver's licenses and undergo a brief background check before we were allowed to enter the post. Once admitted, we followed a map that we received to historic sites, the first being a frontier museum. This is the coat that belonged to an infantryman assigned to Fort Leavenworth in 1899. This is one of the set of shoulder boards that an officer would have worn on his uniform. This is an 1848 Colt revolver on display in the museum. This is an all-purpose freight wagon pulled by mules from 1870 until the 1930s. When pulled by 4 mules, it could carry 3,000 to 5,000 pounds of cargo. This horse-drawn 1909 ambulance was used at Fort Leavenworth until the late 1920s. It's the same model used in World War I. The ambulance can hold either 8 men seated on benches or 4 on stretchers. The 10th Cavalry was formed in 1866 at Fort Leavenworth, made up primarily of black soldiers. The Indians referred to these black soldiers as Buffalo Soldiers. In the 1980s, General Colin Powell served at Fort Leavenworth. 20 years later, he returned to dedicate a statue to the Buffalo Soldiers. In 1862, Fort Leavenworth was identified by President Lincoln as one of 14 locations that needed a national cemetery. There are more than 23,000 graves representing every conflict since the War of 1812. On Friday, August 17th, Carol and I visited Grinner Place. In 1831, Moses Grinner became the earliest permanent white settler in the area. He moved to the area from Kentucky with his wife Annie, who was half Delaware Indian. In 1854, Moses was contracted by the U.S. Army at Fort Leavenworth to build and operate a ferry across the 100-yard-wide Kansas River, just west of Kansas City, Kansas, at a location known as Delaware Crossing. Moses operated this ferry from 1855 to 1860. Moses's ferry was used extensively by travelers over the Fort Leavenworth, Kansas to Fort Scott, Oklahoma military road, and by traders, freighters, and soldiers traveling between the forts or to Santa Fe, New Mexico. The fare was 50 cents if walking and $2 if traveling by wagon. Having been living in a log cabin until this time, Moses and his wife built a large two-story brick house overlooking Delaware Crossing on the Kansas River in 1857. This is the oldest home in the county. Carol and I toured this former Grinner home today. The Grinners also owned a trading post that sold clothing, gunpowder, bullets, perfume, sugar, and scissors to the Delaware Indians in exchange for cash and furs. Moses and Annie Grinner had 10 children, although several passed away before the age of 18. Moses Grinner passed away in 1878. Annie lived in the house until 1905 when she passed away. Both are buried approximately a quarter-mile away in a small church cemetery. Only 2 pieces of furniture still in the house were actually used by the Grinners while they were still living. The rest of the furniture, although time-specific, did not belong to the Grinner family. This dresser was received by the Grinners from a family as payment for crossing the river on the ferry. Our tour guide said that in later years, Annie stored hard candy on the top shelf. The grandchildren would pull the drawers out a little and then climb up and take candy. That's how the corners of the furniture became damaged. A family named Hampson bought the house in 1950 and turned it into a fried chicken restaurant. They dug out the basement and lived in the basement until 1968 while running the restaurant. This is a photograph of Bernice Hanson cooking in the kitchen at Grinner Place. Our tour guide said that when the Hansons were offered a sizable profit if they would sell the house in 1968, they refused, pointing out the historical significance of the house. The house was later sold to the state of Kansas. On August 18th, Carol and I visited the former Mojave Stagecoach stop 15 miles south of Kansas City in Olathe, Kansas. Contrary to popular belief, automobiles and airplanes have not been around very long. Before automobiles and airplanes were invented, if you wanted to see someone in another town, you had to ride a stagecoach. A stagecoach is just a fancy wagon, pulled by as many as 4 horses. But the horses worked very hard, so you couldn't expect them to travel all day without food, water, and rest. And since travel was very slow, you may also need a break, and possibly some food and water. When your stagecoach stopped, you had approximately 20 minutes to eat and get something to drink while the horses were resting or being replaced by another team. When you arrived at the Mojave Stagecoach stop, you would follow the stairs down to the basement where a hot meal would be waiting. 50 to 100 meals were served at the Mojave Stagecoach stop per day. Then you had to get back on the stage before they pulled out to continue to your destination. In order to have feed for the horses and the stagecoach passengers, stops were typically a farm where cattle and crops were raised. Mojave Stagecoach stop, like most other stagecoach stops, would have had a smoker for preserving meat. The Mojave Stagecoach stop has a blacksmith on site who could tighten loose horseshoes, repair a wagon wheel, or assist with other minor repairs as needed. And with that, I'm going to cut today's and this week's video a little short. We will be leaving Kansas on Monday, August 20th. Kansas is the 18th state that Carol and I have visited together. Carol, Jasper, and I will be offline for 1 month while we see family in South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska. Then shortly after that, we will be headed to Arizona for the winter. Since we are still trying to see all 50 states together, it seemed like we were wasting our time going back to the same place that we spent so much time at last year. We have a site reserved from November 1st of this year through March 31st of 2019 at a large campground in Apache Junction, Arizona, which is near Phoenix. I will provide more details on this campground after we get there. If you like this video but have not yet subscribed, please do so to be notified of future videos. And feel free to share this with your friends. Thanks for watching.